Hello, everyone. Welcome to the EU-friendly August 1st edition of the Gateway API meeting. I'll start sharing my screen here. Hopefully you can see the meeting notes, which I don't have in my usual dark mode for some reason. There. I don't know why that happened. There we go. That's better. Okay, so today is the first of hopefully I think today is the first of, we are going to do the first Tuesday of every month as an EU-friendly time, which is, this is 8 a.m. Pacific time, which for a lot of Europe ends up being in the early afternoon. We really, more so than most meetings, it would be nice for you to put your name on the agenda, the attendees, because it just kind of helps give more credence to having this alternative time zone when we can see a big turnout. And we do have a pretty big turnout. We have 16 people here, which is especially interesting considering our calendar stuff is broken and we couldn't actually send out the invites. So I'm really glad to see so many people here, given that the invite wasn't working correctly, which we will get fixed soon. Yeah, so for anybody who's new here, please do feel free to kind of raise your hand, use the Zoom raise your hand function. We would love to hear from you and just kind of introduce yourself and say, hey, I'm working on Gateway API in this way, or don't if you don't want to. It's not a requirement or anything, but we would love to hear from you. We are an open agenda, so if you have anything you want to bring to the agenda, please feel free to put it here above the triage, which will be what we'll do at the end if we have time. If we don't make it to your agenda item today for some reason, which I think will be okay given what we have so far, we will try to fold that over into the next meeting. And if you can't make the later meetings, then maybe we'll fold it into next month's meeting for you if that's what you want. So I'll give a couple seconds and sip some coffee in case anybody wants to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started on the agenda.
While we're waiting for introductions, David has made the excellent comment that if you make your window narrower, it will be much more legible. He said it more politely than that, though. Yeah, thank you. Much better.
Okay. Cool. All right, then we'll get started. And Rob wants to start talking about the V080 release.
Yeah, so I feel like I've been talking about this release for ages now. I think we actually are getting close. But the big milestone that happened last week is we finally got enough time with all the SIG Network reviewers, which are basically Tim, Cal, and Mike Zappa as well, and got to basically present what we were hoping to change in 080. And I'm realizing we had some slides. I can share those. I'll add them to the agenda after, and some meeting notes as well. The reason we do this is we're trying to, basically speed up the review process as quickly as we can. The whole organization structure of SIG Network, Kubernetes as a whole, is when you're a sub-project, to get a release, to get approval, whatever, you need to come back and talk to SIG chairs, API reviewers, etc., and run by whatever ideas you've had happen, you want to release. So yeah, thank you for whoever's adding a link to those slides.
I happen to have it.
Perfect. And so yeah, we did that presentation, and it gives us we basically take an hour and we try to have those initial discussions about the new enhancements. A lot of it was Gamma this time that we're trying to get through, and usually it's a formality. This time we got more feedback and more pushback on both the major themes that we were presenting. One of them was Gamma, and one of them was routability. Gamma, the pushback was, and I was definitely not the only person there. So anyone, Shane, Flynn, whoever else was on that call, feel free to fill in gaps. Gamma, the major pushback was that service duality, I think is the term that was used, is very confusing. The idea that we've talked a lot about in Gamma of a service front end and the service is both a front end and a set of backends, and that's a confusing concept in Kubernetes. And with Gamma, we're just going all in on that. We're taking that thing that Kubernetes SIG network chairs kind of regret, and we're just like, just embracing it and going all in. And so that makes them uncomfortable, I guess you could say. They would broadly consider it not pretty. What was the word that was used? I think stinky was a word that was used. A variety of adjectives. So anyway, that's what it was. With that said, the final conclusion on Gamma was that there's been a lot of discussion about this. This is not the first time this has come up. There's still no better alternative. There's a lot of interest in using something like cluster IP gateways as a potential better front end to represent Gamma, but we agree that's farther away and we don't want to delay Gamma forever. So as far as I understand it, I think we're okay to continue moving forward with Gamma as it is proposed.
That was my understanding as well.
Yeah. And anyone else want to add additional feedback, thoughts on that Gamma discussion? Cool. Okay. And we'll try and add more notes, etc. Yeah, Dave said, I think ugly was a term that was used. Yeah. So yeah. Then the next thing that came up was routability. Routability, unfortunately, we also got significant pushback, and this was pushback that despite our attempts, were not successful at making our case for this one. And I think the most critical feedback that we got was that we don't know what this does with multi-network. So the idea is that for those that aren't familiar with routability, we introduced three types of routability: public, private, and cluster. And the idea is that you would say, I want a public gateway, and you'd get a gateway that was exposed to the internet, or you'd want a cluster gateway, and that's one that just gives you a cluster IP, roughly. The feedback was that especially public and private are already confusing terms. They mean different things to different people. And then when you add the concept of multi-network, where gateways, etc., may be on different networks, what does it mean to be public in that context? Or what does it mean to be private in that context? What if, instead there's more nuance of I'm accessible on these two networks or on this network or whatever. But this is, I guess this is the value of bringing this back to SIG Network leads is that there are more SIG Network subprojects than just Gateway API, and multi-network is one of them that, we have not interacted with that much. And this is one area where we would intersect and potentially not well. I do think that cluster IP and multi-network actually largely make sense together. Like, I want a cluster IP from network foo is a fairly sensible thing to do. But as seems to be the trend for this specific gap, we're really struggling to define terminology for network concepts that are kind of outside of the Kubernetes bubble. Like, inside Kubernetes, we understand and have defined what cluster IP means. Outside Kubernetes, the terms are a little messier, shall we say. Public and private aren't as well defined as I would like. And yeah.
I
Go
looked
ahead.
into the multi-cluster GEP stuff. So they allow you to define like pod networks. Their roadmap shows they're going to address multi-network services next year. So I'm like, okay. It's like, so I wonder if like the workaround is like, instead of defining these, what I would call more user-friendly constants. Essentially, maybe the ask then was like, we do references to network resources, kind of how we do like parent refs. But and that then can handle like, hey, instead of being the routability, use line and gateway to a bunch of networks. That could be a way to salvage this in the short term. But I don't know how you would represent like cluster or public, which because those are
I think the fundamental issue we were running across was that it seemed that nobody had great answers for how to reference those semantics in a way that made sense when we took multi-network into account. There wasn't any pushback of, sorry, let me phrase that more gracefully. The feedback we got was very much, hey, go talk to the multi-network guys and then let's come back and figure out what to do, as opposed to, no, never do this. But this was last Thursday, I think it was. It's only been a few days since this happened. And so I don't think anybody's yet started that discussion with the multi-network folks.
I created a Slack thread, just not about this topic, but just like what the roadmap is. It feels like they're so far away from being able to offer opinions here. So I think it's like, then that just makes this API going to be like, if you make it open enough to be able to reference some arbitrary resource that might or might not exist in the future, then we can have the cement. Then we allow ourselves to, like public could be defined by an arbitrary list of networks.
As someone who pays attention to all the sub-projects, including multi-network, I agree that putting ourselves at the pace of multi-network to come up with a resolution here may pose some problems in terms of timing. At the same time, I still do think
That was very gracefully phrased.
Thank you. I still think that we should probably go ahead and start that conversation with Mache and Zappa. Zappa also goes to those meetings frequently, more than me, actually. I haven't been able to go to the last couple. And just get that ball rolling, because they may have some other ideas too. They may understand that trying to tie us together might actually have problems for both of us even. And we can come to a discussion that can lead to like, okay, go back to Cal and Tim and be like, well, we can't really combine these efforts for this purpose. And here are our timing problems. I think it's not a, you said salvage, and I don't think we're in that shape at all with this. We're in tuning. We have to do some tuning is what we need to do here. So I think that we just start that conversation going, and we'll get to a resolution faster than we think.
Yeah, and my own thoughts here are that yes, multi-network will take a while to define, but I think what we need from that group, that working group specifically, is some kind of agreement or sign off that wherever we, that we have a plan that will work with their eventual plans. Like we don't need to wait for them to have fully defined everything. We just need to have some kind of agreement that the direction we're going can be compatible with the direction they want to go, or any number of directions they may go. I think that's my perspective. But I agree, the timing, they're earlier in design and development than we are at this point. And we don't want to wait for them to complete their development before we can just move on with this gap.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to the next bi-weekly and bring up what's going on here.
Cool. Yeah, let me know. Is that this week or next week?
It's the 10th.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll try and make sure I'm there as well then. Cool. So I should also add, I think, we're still on this general topic, that I feel bad that we missed this. And by we, I mean people that reviewed the gap before we took it to, presented it to SIG Network as a whole. I really want to avoid this kind of disconnect, surprise, whatever in the future. It's really an awful feeling to have seen so much awesome work go into this just to, squeeze it into 080, and then at the last minute, it ends up getting bumped from the release. One, sorry that happened. And two, I want to do everything we can to avoid that from happening in the future. That's a shared opinion with others, that the people that we're reviewing as well from SIG Network side. So, I think there's a lot of appetite for having more involvement and discussions with Tim, Cal, Zappa, etc. Earlier on. One of the easiest ways to do that is just to take these gaps once we have some kind of consensus or rough consensus within Gateway API, just bring it up to SIG Network meetings. They meet every 2 weeks. That set of people are there. We can do a rough high-level review of, hey, are you seeing something that here that we've missed that affects other sub-projects, that affects other SIGs, whatever it might be. Definitely want to avoid this kind of pain in the future. For reference, we did have one other gap that had to get pulled back at the last minute in the past, but unfortunately, we just missed the multi-network aspect here. So yeah, sorry that we missed that, and we will work on getting a better process involved so there are less ugly surprises like this at the last minute. Hopefully none. Yeah, that's I think that's the updates for the 080. Well, that's just 080 review. The 080 timeline, we'll get back to that. The 080 timeline, we are working on a couple parallel things. There was some meaningful gamma feedback that the API spec that we have right now does not include some of the restrictions that the GEP has. For example, the GEP says you can only use these service types. We don't have that in the API spec. We need to just make the API spec a little bit more descriptive. Then we, at least unfortunately for 080, we need to pull routability back to provisional, which means at least temporarily, well, just temporarily pulling routability back until we have a better answer there. I think those are the main action items for 080. There's also some parallel work for Cell. We're trying to get as much validation as possible into Cell as quickly as possible, but it may not cover all resources in the API before we release, but at least we'll have HTTP route, gateway, and gateway class covered. Yeah. So that's a very long-winded 080 topic. Any comments, questions, concerns?
Yeah, just specifically want to see where the Gamma API spec feedback is. I might be able to pick up that. It's just some minor tweaks.
Oh yeah, no, there's probably, I think the only place it is meeting notes, and we should share those meeting notes. I don't know. I think that belongs to me. I think I own that doc. So yes, let me do a follow-up to share those. And yeah. Thanks, Mike.
I have some notes that I can toss your way too, Rob.
Oh, perfect. Great.
Cool, thanks.
So also for 0.8, there was the whole timeout syntax debacle. I mean, discussion.
Yeah, I've got that in triage. We can move it wherever we want because
no, let's just
I don't
leave it
care.
in triage. I didn't realize it was already there.
No, it's fine. But yes, I agree. That's another. Yeah, that's another thing. We were so close on getting that in. I thought we were on track for 080, but I mean, I guess fortunately we caught that before it got too far. But yeah, timeout formatting is way more complicated than I ever dreamed possible.
Actually, sorry, I'm looking at the clock and realizing I'm going to have to drop off early on this one.
Yeah.
So if we can talk about timeout syntax for a minute, if we even have a representative group of people.
Yeah, no, that works for me. I think it's the very last one on triage right now. It's the timeout formatting, but there's I mean, there's I think this specific PR has the most discussion. It also links out to an API review Slack thread that has more discussion. There's good luck trying to follow the discussion here. And then in API reviews as well. I think if you go all the way to the very bottom, I tried to summarize what I think the consensus is here, that we're aiming for some subset. This is something like that has largely been the case for a while, that we're aiming for a subset of what is possible via cell and Go duration formats. Theoretically, that includes Open API, but that's less clear because the Open API flavor we're using in Kubernetes, I'm not sure if it exists elsewhere.
I think it does not.
Yeah.
I've spent a little while looking into this, and I have become convinced that when Kubernetes says the API server takes an open API spec and does validation, I've become convinced that what they actually mean is we take this thing that's an open API spec plus some additional type definitions and use it for validation. Open API itself does not describe the duration format that Kubernetes describes.
Yeah.
Open API is doing Open API wrong and we're doing it right. Heard you loud and clear.
You know, great, fine interpretation. But it does raise some interesting questions of whether we should simply say, let's just use the syntax that Kubernetes already accepts for this, rather than defining yet another one. The big, I hesitate to say limitation, the big source of some controversy there seems to be that Kubernetes OpenAPI-ish validation will accept units of days and weeks, which don't really make sense for timeouts, although they do make sense for durations like certificate expiration times. But it has the big win that, you know, Kubernetes already defines it and people using Kubernetes are probably used to it.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, the problem is that no official Kubernetes API uses duration anywhere. And so,
but again,
but
why define yet another standard when we can use an existing standard? And
so
I realize
the argument,
I'm taking the opposite tack from XKCD than I often take, but in this case, I
think the argument is that for whatever strange reason, cell has the format defined by cell, well, Kubernetes Open API validation, whatever that thing is different and has some very strange variations from Go duration formats. And I think there's a very strong preference. I know I have a strong preference to have the ability to parse this both with Go duration, and I know other languages also support or have
what do you mean by parse this with Go duration?
So you can use Go duration, Go time libraries to parse duration from a string. That's it.
So I was about to say the major distinction there is the lack of floating point for Open API, but no, the other one is that time.parse duration has days but not weeks, if I remember correctly, and stir format.parse duration has days and weeks. But oddly enough, stir format is a Go library that is already linked into the Kubernetes API server. So there's not really an issue with parsing this from Golang. Yeah, it is a weird thing to me, I think is the right way to put it. Cell does have a duration type. Cell's duration parser. Sorry, I have to reread this one because I'm getting confused as to which specific one has which specific behavior, because there are so many of them that we've ended up looking at, right? Oh my God.
You're all right.
Yeah, so
I think we just to note, not that we necessarily need to stop right now, but we are at the halfway point. We have a little bit more to go, so we should probably try to Try to round it
I
up in
think-
the next 5 minutes or
Well,
so.
I think clearly what needs to happen is that Rob and I should go and arm wrestle for a while or something like that. Somewhat less facetiously, I think that it would be great if anybody else has opinions on this one to chime in on the issue and or in Slack if we want to do it there. I would personally be
Yeah.
kind of sad if we can't get timeouts into 0.8 because of a formatting issue. And for that reason, I would personally rather have this in 0.8 than, let me phrase that differently again. It is less important to me that we use the existing Open API format than it is that we get this into 0.8. So if the only consensus is that we do a very constricted thing now, and then we can expand it in the future, I am okay with that. Other opinions would be welcome, and
I think that
and
is
yeah.
wise.
Yeah, so I'm definitely a fan of more restricted format. I know basically everything is lined up. I think if we are trying to introduce scope before we merge anything, we should have a very real discussion with API reviewers, SIGNet API reviewers, to see if they have issues with this. Timeouts is yet another thing that has proven very controversial, and we have spent a absurd amount of time going back and forth on timeout formatting. And I'm concerned if we try to merge this in the next week or so, the API review process will just be slowed down to, I don't know what, just, debating the merits of whether we should have compound values or not, for example.
That's why I want to be clear that I would rather have it in 0.8. That's the most important thing to me personally, although I certainly have opinions on what I would like to see for the format, but
yeah, that makes sense. Let's.
For similar reasons, by the way, I would rather do 0s than quote string 0, simply because specifying that you must always have a unit makes it simpler to specify.
So if you have opinions or thoughts on this, I mean, there's already, I think, almost every opinion. Well, no, I shouldn't underestimate. There are probably more opinions that could be stated here, but don't lose track of this one. I think it's not a question of if, but when we get this in, and maybe we just need to follow up with Tim and Cal and others just to confirm that, to understand their feelings about this specific gap.
That seems like it'd probably be a good idea. In any case, right?
Yep. Okay. Yes, I think that's all very accurate. But yes, as Shane said, I'd say we should keep on moving. Very, very selfishly, but also this is entirely related to that last discussion. We have a very hard deadline of getting 1.0 out the door in October, which, as open source Kubernetes goes, that's basically tomorrow. I mean, not quite, but it is. Things move slowly, and so we don't have much time to fit anything else in. Is really the goal, the idea here. So every ounce of effort is on releasing 1.0. This 0.8 release is really just preparing things. We're doing some version bumps, some other things that are the cell validation, just some other basic things that will make the 1.0 release a little bit smoother. And also it's for clarifying that Gamma is something that people can and should use at this point. But 1.0 is just around the corner. And I think what that means is we need to have, by all intents and purposes, a feature freeze with very minimal exceptions. And those exceptions are basically whatever are helping our case for 1.0. So conformance is just a huge, huge deal for us. That's been something like we've been saying is a big part of the 1.0 release. Policy attachment is a big concern for us. What we've seen is that people continue to build on top of the policy attachment model that exists. And that's, I think, good, but we really need to improve the UX, because the UX, as Flynn and others have pointed out, has some very real issues. And that one's a risk, I would say, to the health of the API ecosystem as a whole. If we're not able to improve that UX, we're going to have everyone building on top of it and just creating a poor experience across the board, whatever implementation you're using. So things that improve that are absolutely critical. And then there's a final class that I think is harder to define, but there are some features that we've made an argument are critical enough that there's a substantial set of users that will not use the API if this feature is not present. I think timeouts is probably one of them, but this is a little harder to define. Yeah, so
The only other one I remember that we brought up earlier was there are people who will absolutely not use Gateway API if there's no way to say, I need an NLB instead of an ALB or something like that.
yeah. I mean, it's actually pretty similar. I mean, that's a little bit different than the routability gap, but I think a similar concept of I want XLB or cluster.
Yeah,
we'll see what we can do. But I think that's the rough order of priorities that we want to focus on. So other gaps can move forward, but they are not, like, we can talk about them. They'll be in provisional state, etc. But unfortunately, we just don't have enough time to include really anything else in the scope of this release that doesn't meet one of those criteria, I would say. Yeah. And then because, the timeline is very limited, and because we had those kind of surprises in our last review, our goal is to provide regular updates, maybe every SIG Network meeting, to just describe, hey, here are the things we're working on. Here's the latest proposal for X, and just provide those opportunities to give feedback earlier, so there are less surprises all around. Yeah, I've been talking a lot, but that's what I think is our path to 1.0. Again, target is October, and that is a harder target than just about any release timeline we've had before. So, yeah.
Buckle up.
Yeah, that's it.
And on that note, I'm actually going to have to take off. Thanks much.
See you later.
I'll talk to y'all later.
Cool.
Yeah, so by the way, not sure if that's gonna be in scope for 1.0. But yeah, that's the gap for supported features in the gateway class. I watched the API review, and I see this is in scope. So since the API review, nothing has changed. So like you'd confirm, but I imagine it's still in scope. I incorporate all the feedback from the people, so thanks for that. So, and it's been waiting for a while. So if any people have more feedback or something, so I'm happy to know. Otherwise, I'm happy to merge it and start working with the other implementations to implement this.
Yeah, this, in my opinion, is something that is broadly related to conformance and improving conformance experience as a whole. But I'm saying that just as an individual. I haven't had a bigger discussion about whether or not it makes sense in 1.0. I think it probably does, but that's just my own bias showing through. I think I owe you a follow-up review on this one, or maybe I think I've reviewed it at least once, but like you said, I think everything's, resolved on this one, and it feels pretty close to ready. I think your target in this specific PR is just provisional anyways, right? Yeah. So I don't think there's anything too big that's left on this one.
Yep. I'll give it one more look too, but it would be very good to have this on 1.0 because it is so nice for the user to be able to see that somewhere. If not something that we use programmatically, it is still nice for like a user to be able to go look at the gateway class and say, hey, by the way, I don't support these extended features. Oh, good. That is good for me
Yeah.
to know.
Yeah. I'm not sure what we're gonna evolve with the policy attachment concerns that you mentioned before, but like after we have this, so we need to follow within similar gap to update the status with some policy or related CRDs. I'm not sure if it's in scope, like policy attachment for, but yeah, like maybe it will be one of the features we need to put at a critical features before. So yeah, I'm wondering if there is such list of the critical things we need to solve before the release. And if there is, I think we should bring the policy attachment, like the supported resources, related resources. I have a discussion there while like Nick was involved, and I can link it there.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I know we have a set of issues defined, you know, the problems with policy attachment as it exists, and one or two potential solutions, including what Gaurav has been working on with Gateway Cuddle, and then there's been some discussion about status for, you know, showing that a policy has been attached to a resource. But I think we're open to other, I think at this point, small things. Yeah, what I can't remember this specific discussion though. So if I don't know if anyone can open that specific link. Okay, yeah, I remember. Thank you. Yeah, I think this is the kind of thing, like, again, we have very limited time, so we're not going to be able to, you know, do a big push for anything. But if it's something that's small and well contained and clearly helps the policy attachment UX, I think that is the kind of thing that we're trying to prioritize between now and 1.0.
Yeah.
And
yeah, so yeah, second bullet is the Ingress to Gateway first release. We have so we want to ideally release Ingress to Gateway with 0.8, which is going to be the first release. There is a big refactor CL to basically enable more provider specific logic, to bring in more provider specific logic, and then to actually make the tool more usable, because we are not only converting ingresses, there are many custom resources to be converted in different implementations. So yeah, encourage everybody, like, you know, whoever's interested, to review part of it or all of it, and then ideally I want to work with a few implementations to implement. So I've chatted with Rob about it. I think we need at least 2 implementations before we release it. So yeah, we're aiming for the 0.8. However, we don't have a lot of time, so we might get later release, or maybe, I don't know, a few weeks after. But yeah, ideally we want to release it together, and maybe also provide like a nice blog post to, you know, bring more users to kind of use it and make it, like, get the initial feedback also before 1.0. So yeah, so it will help users to actually migrate to use Gateway API.
yeah, this is awesome. Big fan of everything that's been happening with Ingress to Gateway. As a heads up, I don't think we've mentioned this anywhere yet, but Lior is now an improver on Ingress to Gateway. He's been doing a lot of work and has brought new contributors to the project. And I'm really excited about getting that first release out. So yeah, thanks for taking the ownership and leadership of that project. And yeah, I can't wait to see this actually released, and just, echo what Leo is saying. We want this to be useful for not just Ingress API to Gateway API, but also additional providers. I think some examples had been like Contour has some custom APIs, similar for Istio. Converting those to Ingress, to Gateway API, sorry, could be very, very cool in this project. So I'm excited to see kind of the first steps of that. If you have another API that you'd like to work on translating to Gateway API, this tool is, moving towards a place where you could do that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yeah, so have a look at SCL. Yeah, we aim to provide a really easy infrastructure to just onboard more provider-specific logic. Thanks.
All right, with that, we have a little over 10 minutes to try to go through some triage. If you are terribly uninterested in triage, don't feel like you have to stick around. But otherwise, I'll get started
I just
on
have
that.
a quick question. One thing I'd kind of consider relevant was the backend protocol selection gap that I have that uses the Kubernetes annotation. The discussion upstream said like, hey, we don't care about raw. We're not gonna, it makes no sense for Kubernetes use case, but there's still value, I think, in saying like, hey, this backend has is using like H2C or WebSocket as an example. Those effectively for the work for Gateway folks here would just be essentially, I need to update the gap. You say, yes, these annotations can influence implementations protocol selection, and that would be it. Is that something we would consider good for GA, or should
Sorry, I haven't followed that as much. I know I've been watching the CAP, the app protocol CAP. And there's already a gap. Do you remember the number, or like what's the state of that gap right now? Is it just a PR at this point, or some
it's
part
still a
merged?
PR.
Okay.
I was kind of waiting on the raw protocol to be decided on upstream, and then that's sort of been decided on. Let me find the gap number. Gap is 1911. PR is 1979. Gee, this is saying using a Kubernetes specific annotation to allow users to specify protocol.
What was the bottom, like what was decided in the cap about the raw?
They don't like it. They think it's a band-aid for controlling like implementations. So for example, a lot of the raw stuff was to indicate don't do any smart probing, automatic probing. And they're like, hey, that's really sort of out of bounds for Kubernetes and really implementation specific. So then really this gap would just be like dropping the raw and then including WebSocket in this. I guess it's already there. And probably dropping that like the raw table and stuff like that.
I'm trying to remember, how does this overlap with the CAP? Because the CAP already defines the protocol, like the custom protocols, like HPA2 over clear text, WebSocket now, I believe as well. I think Dave, you added that.
Yeah, this gap would be essentially indicating that gateways should look at that protocol and recognize these values as legitimate values to influence what the backend protocol selection is.
What happens now? Like, do we just like doesn't the implementation do whatever they want? They don't even look at this field.
I would say Contour does not look at this field. And also
Is-
Istio has their own strings, I think, for that.
Yeah.
Is this something that we could realistically conformance test?
I don't think so.
You could,
Um,
you just
Oh,
create a service and thing when specify the protocol. You can skip this API
And-
stuff. This is just showing an alternate example.
And then you would need, it would have to be extended because I don't think any, I don't think any of these are guaranteed to be supported by an implementation, by any implementation.
Yeah, exactly.
how would you check? How would you check whether the actual implementations take this value into consideration?
I would just create like a upstream service that listens on HTTP WebSocket and WebSocket secure, and then just point a route at it, HTTP route, and then it would make the call, make the request.
I see.
So at this point, if I'm understanding correctly, this is really just saying that thing that's already defined in upstream Kubernetes is something that, is supported and relevant for Gateway API. And then maybe the most notable part of this gap is defining which of those protocols are supported by which of the route types and service port protocols. Is that the idea?
Yeah. And
Okay.
given that, for example, let's say like raw is gone now from upstream, but if that makes sense for Gamma to be able to configure, don't do any protocol sniffing, then we might need to define additional constants to this gap that are not Kubernetes constants, but just like a gateway constants. But
Yeah,
that could be like an addendum in the future. I'm just trying to figure out like, hey, should I rework this gap? Because if you're okay.
I think that's I think that's important to acknowledge, like, what do we expect from implementations to like look at and program. Yeah, like, so I think it's definitely good. It's good to have. So we don't have implementations, different implementations doing different things. Yeah, I'm not sure about the specific constants. I'll need to look at why Kubernetes raw was rejected, and then to see whether something is also applies for this gap. But yeah, maybe Robin Shane thinks something else, but I think it's definitely good to have it in.
Getting rid of raw will make this much simpler. And that becomes a problem for a future date for certain implementations introduced.
I've been doing a lot of the talking, Shane. I don't know if you have opinions on this one.
I don't have a lot to say about it yet. I feel like I need to go back over it all.
Cool. Yeah, I kind of would echo what Lior says. I think this makes sense. I need to look into the specifics as well, but the idea of saying, hey, this Kubernetes thing that is already defined is something that we care about, and just really defining the interaction between our API and this field makes sense to me as an important thing to cover. I do worry sometimes we've really gotten stuck on the interaction between route types and protocol supported. So there may be some time spent just on the specifics there, but I think this is very reasonable. I I see it as important enough that it could qualify for 1.0, but I don't think it's, the absence of it would not block 1.0 in my opinion.
Yeah. Do we feel like we need to take it to SIG Network meeting as well? Maybe we get more feedback there. Just interested because, yeah, I don't think we got any.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, SIG Network meetings are fairly lightly attended, but I think the people that we really want would be there, and it would be helpful to just ensure that they're fine with the direction where or Dave is proposing here. Yeah.
Yep, I think that would be a good use of time.
Yeah. So like, yeah, happy to follow up on this as well. I'm not sure if there's SIG Network meetings similar time, but if not, I'll follow with the notes.
I can get you the info for that meeting if that's what you were asking. Was that what you were asking?
No, like I was saying, I'm not sure if there's email meetings or whenever Dave's planned to bring it up. But if there's no email friendly time zone, so I'm just
it's usually at noon my time, so it would probably be like between like 5 and 8 your guys' time.
Yeah, it's 1 hour later than this meeting, and it's on Thursdays.
Oh, that's
Actually,
cool.
this coming Thursday. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that sounds good. I'm not invited though. What's it?
It's on the SIG Network
weird.
calendar, which you can actually get from you can see it on the Gateway API contributor page, because the calendar is loaded up there. You can find the SIG Network. It's every 2 weeks.
I have a conflict with that one. Is anyone here able to maybe mention the get there?
I usually run the meeting, so I can mention it. I don't know if I can carry the conversation forward for you though.
Okay.
So I don't know, maybe we should wait until you maybe the next one you could do.
No, I have a
Time,
standing
but-
conflict
Oh, a standing
with-
conflict. Okay.
because I'm on a Creative Technical Oversight Committee and that has a standing meeting at exactly the same times.
Understood. So if you want to put it on
I
the
might be able to
agenda,
skip. I might be able to skip the Creative one if there's
okay,
quorum.
figure that. If you can't, put it on the agenda and put my name on it, and I'll at least bring it up and try to point to an async conversation with you, so that we can kind of carry it forward.
Yeah.
Alright.
Also, I might be able to join and try to carry on. Not as good as you probably do, but yeah, I can do my best.
I don't carry well. I just show up.
Cool. Well, thank you. Appreciate everyone's efforts to make all this stuff happen. It's all going to come together pretty, I think, amazingly in the next few months here, because the heat is on. So thank you all and have a good one, and we will see you next week.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers.